The NCLS National Church Life Survey tells us that of churches, all the churches in Australia, half of them are less than 50 people, or very close to half of them are less than 50 people. The sovereign God gives growth where He chooses. But the biggest single human factor in gospel growth by a mile is leadership.
G'day and welcome to the Reach Australia podcast. My name's Dave, I'm one of the consultants with the Reach Australia network, and what you've just heard is our steward at the Reach Australia National Conference from earlier this year, and he has delivered some pretty confronting and some pretty sobering statistics. Let's make sure we've let those statistics sink in just a little bit with us. 61% of Australian churches are less than 74 people. 70% of Australian churches are less than 100 people. 78%, let's call it 80. 4/5 of Australian churches are less than 150 people. I hope you have a godly discontent with those numbers and statistics. They're stark, they're confronting, but together as church leaders, we need to acknowledge this is the current state of play in Australian Christianity. The average age in churches is going up, and the number of converts is going down. I invited an MTS couple, they just started at church with us, to come around for lunch. And we had a student minister from Bible College who also came to join us for lunch. And the reason I wanted these two people to meet is because the MTS person and the couple that had just started had been in our church the whole time, a larger church. And the student minister had been in one of those churches, one of the 4/5 of churches less than 150 people. And I wanted this MTS couple to learn and to start to experience what life is like in a church that has less than 150 people, because more than likely, that is the church that they are going to start to minister in. These statistics are even more worrying when we measure them against our own gospel convictions. When we know that heaven and hell are real. When we know that Jesus will return to judge the living and the dead. When we know that our life here on earth is short, and there's nothing like a global pandemic to bring that home to roost in our minds. And when we know that we are compelled and driven by love, we need to acknowledge these statistics together. And you can't hear these things and hear our gospel convictions and not want to do something and not be driven to action. Well, that's what this podcast series is all about. How we're going to turn the dial up on Christianity across Australia. Let's hear from our steward again.
Now you notice the analogies for the Christian minister, for the one in gospel work, the soldier, the athlete and the farmer. Somehow there's actually pushback sometimes about being concerned for results in terms of Christian leadership. Oh, we shouldn't be worried about results. Really? You couldn't get 3 more result-orientated jobs, the soldier, the athlete, the farmer. You get the results wrong, you end up dead, beaten and starving. Results matter.
Results matter. That's what Al has told us. And it's important that we stop and think, how are we going? What difference are we making? Now, even as we say that, we want to affirm right up front that we believe in the sovereignty of God. We know that it's God that brings the growth. But yet we need to assess what's actually happening, what's going on. And we've started to do that as we've run the Reach Australia Development Program, as we've consulted with lots of different churches, different denominations, different parts of Australia. What we've started to see is that we need a framework. We need a place where we can work together in order to start to turn that dial up on Christianity right across Australia. And I'm assuming that's why you're listening. I'm assuming that's why you're a leader in a church or a parachurch organisation, that you want to see more people won for Jesus. You want to see a greater impact for the gospel. And friends, that's our desire here too at Reach Australia. That's our vision. Let's hear more about that vision right now.
We want to reach Australia. We want to see our friends and families, workmates saved in a living relationship with our glorious and great God. This is our urgent passion. But at present, we are not seeing much progress made.
We live in a nation of more than 25 million men, women and children, where no religion is now the largest category of belief in Australia, accounting for more than 30% of people.
Meanwhile, Australia's population is growing at a rate of over 400,000 people each year. And 65% of those people are coming from overseas. We're a national mission field of people who need to hear about Jesus.
Yet the average Australian church is small and getting older. And the very real concern is that the number of workers needed for the harvest is dropping off, not only in cities, but in rural and regional areas as well.
The people whose job it is to lead the churches in reaching the lost are doing it tough. You know, 50% of Australians don't even know where their local church is. And the consistent message that we get from pastors and other church leaders is that they feel stressed and ill-equipped for the task.
We long to see our nation won for Jesus Christ through healthy, evangelistically effective churches.
Our mission is to build a growing network of theologically driven, spiritually vibrant, evangelistically urgent and practically skilled church leaders.
We've combined the strengths and learnings of a number of like-minded organisations to help church leaders and their teams start new churches and grow thriving, healthy churches. It's going to take us all to come together so that under God we might see healthy, evangelistic, multiplying churches, courageously reaching the lost with the gospel.
If we're going to reach Australia, we need to keep planting new churches that reach new people. By 2030, our hope is to support the planting of 200 new churches, seeing them evangelised into existence across Australia through a rigorous assessment process, coaching and a growing planter network.
We also need to work with established churches to develop their leaders and their teams. So by 2030, we want to develop 550 plus church leaders across Australia. We're going to do this primarily through the Reach Australia development program. This includes a comprehensive church health consult, one-to-one coaching and leadership development cohorts.
It is the local church, spiritually healthy, outwardly looking, competent and capable, that under God will reach this country. And we want to help you not only grow spiritually as leaders, but strategically mobilise the saints for this great mission. All you have to do to get started is connect. Visit the website reachaustralia.com.au. Reach Australia, vital leaders, growing, thriving churches.
Well, how amazing would that be? To see churches across Australia healthier than what they are now, captured and gripped by this sense of evangelism that is urgent and passionate, and a desire to see their local neighbourhood and churches filled with non-Christians who are keen to know more about Jesus, and a desire to be multiplying and growing. But those things don't just happen. It takes some intentionality. You don't just drift towards a healthier church. You don't stumble over a culture of evangelism. We need a framework, and we need to be thinking together what that looks like. So what we need is a framework to help us do this vital work. And in this podcast series, there are 5 parts to our framework. The first one is clarify the big thing. Secondly, we're going to look at be faithful to inputs. Thirdly, we're going to talk about taking and building responsibility. Fourthly, it's going to be about breaking it down. And lastly, we're going to think ecosystems together. But right now, to kick us off, we're going to dive deep into clarify the big thing. And we're going back to Andrew Hurd, the senior pastor at EV Church, who's going to help us understand the power of clarifying the big thing.
Now, what is the big thing? What's the big thing? Well, I'd offer Matthew 28. as one way to express the big thing, making disciples. Make disciples, and perhaps make mature disciples, or after what we've heard this afternoon, make holy disciples. Produce holiness in the disciples that are coming to faith. Make mature disciples in ever-increasing number.
Well, Jesus gives it to us. He gives us the big thing. We don't have to go searching for it somewhere else. There it is, right there in Matthew chapter 28. Jesus tells us, "Go and make disciples of all nations, teaching them everything I taught you and baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age." What a great, great thing there is that Jesus done for us. He's given us the big thing. He's told us as his disciples what we are to go and do. We don't need to reinvent it. We don't have to try and make it up. It's right there in the pages of Scripture. But there's another great thing that is there in Matthew 28. Alongside the task is the promise. The promise that Jesus will be with us as we go about doing this big thing. That's just so reassuring. We're going to hear from Greg Lee, the senior pastor at Hunter Bible Church, and he's going to help us understand the push of the gospel outwards in Matthew 28. Let's hear from Greg now.
But every church isn't just going to be looking at the people who are there. The nature of the gospel pushes us outward. A gospel is something that's to be declared. It's not just something that you believe. It's something that you declare. And so every church ought to be looking at the people within it and saying, yes, here are my people and I want them to be like this. But the gospel itself drives us to be declaring it to the whole world. That's what Jesus talks about in Matthew 28, isn't it? He is the Lord. That means preach it to the nations.
You'd be hard-pressed to find someone in Christian ministry that doesn't agree that the big thing is to go and make disciples of all nations from Matthew 28. Perhaps what is harder for some people to see is this ever-increasing number. And what we are trying to capture by that is what Greg showed us, in that idea that the reason that Jesus came was to seek and save the lost. You know, part of what our ministry needs to be is searching for those lost people so they can be found. Seeing those people move from slavery to freedom, from darkness to light. It's what Jesus has told us to do. It's declaring Jesus as Lord to everybody so that they would come to see him as their Lord. Now, we need to make sure we clarify exactly what we are saying here. I've got 3 points of clarification here. The first one is that we want to acknowledge that not all soils are the same. Jesus himself teaches us this, doesn't he? When he teaches on the parable of the sower. There is seed, that is the word of God, that is scattered in different spaces and has different responses. And the last place that it lands is on the good soil. Now, we would love for every church to be planted in the good soil, but we know from Jesus' words that that's just not true. Or let me take you to Acts chapter 17, Paul's famous speech at the Areopagus. And he explains the unknown God to these people listening on. And there's 3 responses. There's the first response where people mock and sneer. And we know that response. You don't actually have to go looking hard to find that response. But there's a second response. There's the people who say, Paul, we want to hear more about who this Jesus is. And there's people like that all over Australia, keen to hear more. But then there's a third response. There's people who say, Paul, this is amazing. We repent, we believe, we want to be Christians. And we want to acknowledge that that happens too. We see all sorts of different responses. A friend of mine church planted up on the North Shore of Sydney. He went about his ministry, did all these sort of great activities. He then moved and did exactly the same sorts of things that he was doing in the North Shore. But he had 2 very different results. On the North Shore, he hardly saw any fruit. Ministry was tough and it was a battle. He went to this new place, did all the same things, and had a completely different response. The church started to grow. we want to acknowledge that not all soils are the same. As we think about this big thing of making mature disciples in ever-increasing number. And so we want to acknowledge that not all soils are the same. The second thing we want to clarify is that we want to go back and acknowledge that God is sovereign here. We recognize that it's God that gives the growth as we talk about that clarity of increasing in number. God gives the growth to it. We absolutely want to acknowledge that. And thirdly, we want to make sure that you know that we know this is no silver bullet. This framework that we're going to present as we think about the big thing, it's not the silver bullet. I know that I am tempted to go searching for the silver bullet, the thing that's going to solve all my problems in ministry. That is not what we're presenting in this framework. We're presenting a way to think about ministry together that hopefully starts to get ourselves organised, and hopefully under God, yes, we'd love to see results, but this is not the silver bullet. And nor are we saying in here that your ministry is worthless. We know that there are many faithful people slugging it out hard for the gospel, hard for the kingdom. We want to uphold that ministry that you are doing and say it's great. We want you to keep doing it. But we want you to think more broadly about how this framework could potentially help you as we start to think about reaching Australia together for Jesus. What is not up for debate is that there is a desperate need for the gospel across Australia. People need to know Jesus. Derek Hanna and Madeline Galea from the Geneva Push have some more statistics for us, and unfortunately, they're just as bad as the ones we heard first up. Let's hear from them now.
If we take optimistic figures about what church attendance is like, there's around 5% of people in Bible-believing churches across Australia. 5%. With Australia's population ticking towards a 25 million mark, that leaves about 23 or so million people who don't know Jesus, who aren't in those churches. There are more churches closing in Australia than there are opening each year. For many Australians, Christianity is associated with narrow-minded moralism. The church is haunted by past failures, people who it should have cared for that it didn't, and Christians have gone the defensive. There's a bunker mentality there. For many as well, the rise of secularism and the apathy that a comfortable life brings in Australia has dulled them to what they would see as the need for the gospel, wondering whether they can just live life without God, without spirituality. And there's been a growing establishment, a growing societal norm that promotes unexamined tolerance as the basis for our interaction. We don't push back on anything, we don't push into anything, we just accept. And that has led to some church leaders and some churches winding back an evangelistic urgency, winding back the offensiveness of the gospel sometimes, and the controversial aspects of the gospel. But proclaiming the gospel is inherently offensive to me, to everyone who's not in a relationship with God. But we have descended at points in church to just an acceptance that we can rebel against the creator of the world and things will be okay. So look, that's the first reason. There is a desperately urgent need for the gospel in Australia. Yeah.
And because even with the complexities, I guess, of our culture now, people are broken and people need, they still need an answer to why they exist, to the brokenness of the world. They need the truth. And yeah, people need Jesus now. It's not that they need him more now than they did previously. The lost has always been the lost, either with Jesus or without. But it's becoming harder for people to know someone who's a born-again Christian, to have a local church in their area that they can go to.
Absolutely. More people from more nations with less exposure to the gospel in Australia. It is a matter of gospel urgency.
Well, there's some pretty confronting statistics again, aren't they? Not many people know a Christian. People don't know where their local church is. Australia's becoming more secular. They're pretty damning statistics. And look, so far we've hit you with some pretty confronting things. So let's change the tone just a little bit here And let's see one area across Australia where this trend's starting to be broken, and it's church planting.
So the National Church Life Survey did a survey years ago. This is 2011 data. It showed that in existing churches, 6% of people weren't in church 5 years ago. So they were either de-churched, that is, they drifted away, or they'd never had anything to do with church, they were unchurched. When we did a study in 2016 of the church plants in Australia, one of the things that we found was that same figure was 33%. It's 5 times more effective in a church plant environment in those first few years than in established churches.
Well, Derek and Madeline have shown us a pretty amazing thing there. Church plants in their first few years are 5 times more effective at evangelism. That's really good news. And we should be getting behind more and more church plants so we can start to see that happening over and over again. And this resonates with my own experience. Back when I was doing a ministry apprenticeship, we were approached by someone, and so they said to us as a church, hey, you guys are into church planting, why don't you come plant a church down with us? Now, they are predominantly a university sort of area, and they sort of, had been bringing people up to our night church on a regular basis, sort of 20, 25 of them each week, and it was great that they were there. And so they said, hey, would you like to church plant, closer to where they live and start focusing around the university? And so the church that I was a part of, just about to finish MTS, said, sounds great, we're super keen. However, what we can't afford is a fully trained minister to give to you. Why don't you think about taking me? And so that's what happened. I went down and we planted a church. So I started Bible college and planted a church all in the first year. It was pretty chaotic. Geneva Push didn't exist. There was no assessment. I was very much thrown in the deep end and just told to give this a go. I felt totally unqualified for the experience. But yet, that first year, we saw approximately about 100 new people walk through our door, which was also quite remarkable because we met in a church, we met in a school hall. It was a little hall down the front, and it was a terrible venue. We would start the service by saying, welcome to church. If you need to use the bathroom, here's a key, here's a torch, take a friend. Because the bathrooms are 150 metres across a very black and dark space in a not very safe space in Sydney. We got a better venue, sort of out the back of the school, but you almost needed a Sherpa to find it. And I remember an international student turning up, following a little postcard that we sort of gave out. Sort of had to go up, what looked like a dead end, but it was a sneaky right-hand turn and then a one-way street. And we moved there because we'd had toilet facilities. But yet that whole year, people kept coming through the door. Over 100 people throughout that first year walked through the door, and they would probably never have walked through a traditional church door. And so what we want is we want church plants that maintain their evangelistic urgency, that don't lose that effectiveness. And so we also want that for our established churches. We don't want that mantra of new churches reach new people as the only thing out there. We want our established churches regaining their conviction of reaching the lost, that ever-increasing number. And we want our church plants to maintain their zeal towards reaching the lost, to evangelize their local community. We don't want to see just church plants reaching new people. We love that they are 5 times more evangelistically effective in their first few years. And so we don't want them to lose their evangelistic edge. We want that maintained all the way through as they continue to go year after year after year. But that's exactly what we want for our established churches as well. We want them to regain that evangelistic focus and intentionality so that they can do it in ever-increasing number. And this is the power of the big thing, clarifying the big thing of making mature disciples in ever-increasing number. Let's hear again from Andrew Hurd, the senior minister at EV Church, as he helps us unpack the power of the big thing.
But it's desperately important that we be clear on what we're trying to achieve. What are we about? Clarity is king. It gives a leader, a church, the power to cut through all the different things that come at them. It gives you ability to say no. Everybody wants you to do their thing. Clarity in what you're about and what the church should be about is powerful.
We're going to take a quick break now, and after the break, when we come back, we're going to keep diving into this clarifying the big thing, the first principle in the Reach Australia framework, and we're going to have a look at some of the things that hinder it.
I think I was the cap on the church. My capacities to be able to create clarity of vision and to lead my team effectively was limited.
This is what I'm so excited about. This is why I got involved with Reach Australia. There's a conference, and the conference really is full of big ideas, provocative ideas, and it does give training. And then there's also this development program that involves 3 core components. So one component is church consult, people who are on your side coming and looking and helping you to identify what's going on in your church and areas to grow.
I've really loved the Reach Development Program, particularly for the consult, the church health consult that was provided for us, just to have a group of really wise people who have a depth of experience at growing churches come in and look at our church with fresh eyes, being able to share with us what they thought our strengths were, but being really blunt about what our growth areas are as well, and the areas where we are not helping ourselves to grow and see disciples made and see new Christians come to new life.
There's also this intensive cohort program where you get lots of good input from people who've been in ministry a long time, along with peers, which works really well.
One of the big things that the program pushed us to do has been to think about being driven by outputs. So not just doing stuff because it's what we do, but actually thinking, where do we want to be, and letting that inform what we do.
And then there's coaching, which is 2 years of someone who's on your side, not just answering your questions, but asking you hard questions, helping you to implement everything. That's the reason I'm so excited about Reach Australia. There's the big ideas in the conference, but then there are the things that help you to change what you're doing in church, rather than just go back and do the same old things.
I wish I did it years ago. So if you're early in your ministry, I commend it to you. Maybe like me, you're many years into your ministry and thinking about where to take things, or you're getting a bit stale, I commend it to you as well.
Welcome back to this first episode of the Reach Australia Framework podcast series, and it's Clarify the Big Thing. Now, what hinders this? What stops us clarifying the big thing? Well, there are 4 things that hinder. The first one is fogginess around the big thing. Now, sometimes I like to just tell my kids, just jump in the car, we're going on a trip. They have no idea where we're going, and it's a bit of fun. They've learnt to sort of roll with it and just sort of jump in and go, okay, I guess Dad's taken us somewhere. But I don't know whether you've ever done that. Just sort of jumped in the car with really no idea where it is that you were going. I actually used to do it a fair bit when one of my kids was quite young. She wouldn't sleep through the night, and so putting her in the car and taking her for a drive, that would actually put her to sleep, that sort of ongoing motion. And even if she didn't sleep, it at least meant my wife got a chance to grab some sleep. But I would just jump in the car and I would just drive. And now we lived near some motorways, so I could just jump on and do laps around Sydney. And I had no destination. And that was okay. But it's not okay when we think about our churches. We need a destination. And so when we're foggy on what the big thing is, it's almost like we're driving our churches to sleep. They don't know where we're going. We don't know where we're going. We're not quite sure what the final destination looks like. And what this plays out in practice is it looks like a lack of alignment. I remember when I started at a church, we were foggy with the big thing. And what this actually started to look like as I landed on the ground was there were lots of good things going on, but we weren't pulling all in the same direction, going in the same way. And so men's ministry was going this way, women's ministry was going here, small groups was going backwards. And what we needed to do was sort of get together and say, that's where we're going to go. We got clarity on the big thing and we started to pull together. And it was a wonderful piece of alignment. So the first thing that hinders is fogginess on the big thing. The second thing that hinders is a lopsided piece of clarity. Now you start to see when we talk about making mature disciples in ever-increasing number, we are capturing two ideas, the making mature and the ever-increasing number. That is the getting of new disciples and the growing of existing disciples. And what can happen is we have lopsided clarity. And that starts to look like you emphasize one over the other. And so if you emphasize that making mature disciples, that's a good thing. We want mature disciples, and you potentially got a church that's deep and, small groups are humming and it's going well, but the ever-increasing disciple, well, that's not a priority. There's no clarity on it. We're not quite sure how we're going to get there. That's lopsided clarity. But again, it can go the other way. You can have lots of clarity. We are here as a church to make ever-increasing disciples, and we're not overly concerned with the mature side of things. And perhaps this is sort of that old church growth, attractional church sort of mentality to it. You sort of do whatever you can to sort of get people into the door. Now, there's a danger, obviously, that we want to protect against there in terms of what you're prepared to give up in order to try and do that. But we love their desire to try and reach the lost. But what we are trying to do is to get clarity on the big thing. Make mature disciples in ever-increasing number. So we don't want lopsided clarity. That's the second thing. The third thing that hinders clarifying the big thing is an unused vision. And so, lots of churches work hard to get clarity. Perhaps they've worked together with someone to sort of come in and help them understand what's the big thing. All right, we're here, that's good. But then what happens is you sort of tuck it into the second drawer. It never sees the light of day again. It doesn't inform what you're doing. It doesn't help you say yes, doesn't help you say no. Not because it can't, it's because you've tucked it away in the second drawer, like that gadget you bought for your kitchen, that fancy potato peeler. You thought, this is going to revolutionize my life. But you've tucked it in the second drawer, you've never seen it again, and it's unused. Some of our vision stuff is like that. It is unused. We've worked hard at it, but it's unused. That's the third place where clarifying the big thing is hindered. The fourth area where we are hindered in clarifying the big thing is being scared of numbers. Now, numbers are not supposed to be a rod for our back. Numbers are there to help us. And so it's okay, and it's a good thing, and a godly and, thing to desire to say, well, I want my church that's 100 at the moment to be 150 people. That is a good thing. And we shouldn't be scared of that. We shouldn't be driven by numbers in a way that it's competitive. Two churches going up against each other like a football match in some way. Like church A is winning, church B is... That's not how we want to view numbers. They're not there to boast and to brag about. They are there to help us try and figure out what's exactly going on for our church now. So when it comes to thinking about being scared of numbers, Derek and Madeline again have some really helpful things for us to hear at this time.
All right, these are only part of vision statements, but they might give you some ideas as to how you can craft your own. Here's the first one. Our big prayer is that God would give Jesus more than 30,000 people in this region for a start. Now, that's not a small prayer, it's a really big prayer. So there's 300,000 people living in this area, and from what we know, only about 2 to 3% of those are Christian. That's about 6,000 to 9,000 people out of the 300,000. So our vision is to see God give that many more people to Jesus and come to know Him. That's the first one. Now, again, not perfect, but you can see where it's going. You can see what the vision is. Here's the second one. Different angle, this one. At the moment, there's about 93% of Australians who don't know Jesus. This means, when we break it down, for each of us, there's about 8 to 10 meaningful connections we have with family and with friends and with colleagues where they aren't sure where they will be when they die. Our vision in the next 3 years is to introduce one of our friends to Jesus so they can know Him and be assured of where they're going to spend eternity.
So now we've seen there are 4 things that hinder us getting clarity around the big thing. Fogginess around where we're going, a lopsided clarity, we sort of fall on one side or the other, an unused vision popping in that second drawer, and being scared of numbers. This is the first episode in the Reach Australia Framework podcast series. What we've seen today is clarify the big thing. We've seen the power of it, we've seen what hinders it. Coming up next time is be faithful to inputs. We're going to start to talk about what it means to be faithful, and a little bit further down we're going to start to look at what it means to be fruitful as well. Now, at the end of every episode, we are going to showcase some new Australian church music. And this week, it's from our friends at MBM. It's called My God and is written and performed by John Reed. Enjoy. God bless. See you next time.
Oh, hey church, my name's John. My God is a song that I wrote reading through Psalm 90 and 91. The first 2 verses of Psalm 90, Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations. Before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world, from everlasting to everlasting you are God. The 2 verses, they speak of God's power, but also that He's our fortress and our refuge, and we can come to Him. So meditating on that, I spent some time writing this song, and here it is.
Forever and before the earth was born, eternity to come and all that's gone, to every generation make it known. My God, my rest, my home, 1,000 years to you, passing day. The treasures of this world are swept away. Then every creature bows before your throne. My God, my rest, my home. The hands that hung the world in frame cover me. The wisdom in your plan extends far more than I can see. You lay me down and lead me to the peace I need. No longer will I fear the arrows of the enemy. I'll be still and I'll be safe, and I'll find strength in your grace. My dwelling place, my refuge in the storm, a shelter for all those who call you Lord. My castle and my faithful cornerstone. My God, my rest, my home, my Savior and the author of my life. When I am overwhelmed, you hear my cry. So fix my faith rest my home. The hands that hung the world in frame, that cover me. The wisdom in your plan extends far more than I can see. You lay me down and lead me to the peace I need. No longer will I fear the arrows of the enemy. Your love will never fade. You raised me from the grave, and I'm chosen as your own. My God, my rest, my hope. Your love will never fade. You raised me from the grave. I'm chosen as your own. My God, my rest, my hope. The hands that hung the world in frame, that cover me. The wisdom in your plan extends far more than I can see. You lay me down and lead me to the peace I need. No longer will I fear the arrows of the enemy. I'll be still, and I'll be safe, and I'll find strength in your grace. I'll be still, I'll be safe, and I'll find strength in your grace.